Have you ever noticed that with negative beliefs, like limpets on a rock, the more you try to dislodge them, the harder to shift they become? As practitioners, we often hear clients say things about themselves which are clearly damaging them, but how to shift those beliefs is another thing entirely. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about a client who said later I had saved her life, a truly amazing thing to hear. And what I did with her was change a belief, and I'll tell you exactly how I did that. And I'm going to talk about how beliefs work so that you can help clients see things in a way that doesn't depress them or frighten them. In other words, how you can reframe their experience of reality. There are so many ways to change beliefs, of course, but stories can be a great way to help people reframe their reality in more objective, creative and wider ways. So that's where we'll start. Stories work so well, of course, because beliefs are in themselves stories about reality, which humans create because we're meaning-seeking beings. So here's a traditional story that shows how beliefs can work. And once there was a boy who was son to a farmer, and the boy, Jack, worked hard on the farm and did his schoolwork well, and each morning he would rise with the lark to milk the cows, collect the eggs from the chicken coops, clean and toil. And his mother had died, so he was in the sole care of his kindly but strict father. And one gloomy, dark afternoon, his father asked to see the boy, Jack. And Jack could tell by his father's stern expression and serious tone that this was an important moment for some reason, and he felt terribly afraid. "Now listen," said his father, "I have something very important to tell you. You must listen really carefully, because this has to do with danger." And his father had almost barked the last word, and he continued, and the boy, although he didn't show it, grew more afraid. "There are parts of this farm you don't yet know very well, but as you are doing more farm work, I need to give you a warning. Behind the barn, down the lane on the left, there's an old shed. I don't think you've ever been in that shed." Okay. "Well, you've got to promise me that you'll never go in that place, because it's a very dangerous place. Have you got that?" So in awe was the boy of his father, that all he could do was mutely nod, and his father smiled and gave him a light pat on the head and "good boy." So the weeks did their thing, and turning into months, and months behaved as they should and turned into years, and the boy grew older, and he proved himself to be an excellent and talented farmer. He had almost superhuman intuition when to plant and sow and reap, and which cows to buy and which to sell. And as he grew through the years, sometimes his mind would sometimes wander to the dark horrors that might lurk in that shed that his father had warned him about. But it was really at the back of his mind. Okay. And eventually the boy became a young man, and his father retired, and he became the farmer. Jack became the farmer, and he implemented new ecological ways of farming. He was able to employ more local people from the community. The farm ran like clockwork, was clean as a farm could be, and the animals were treated well. And the young man was heralded as a genius farmer, and his farm was famous throughout the land as a fine example of what a farm could and should be. But in all of that time, he'd never gone near the feared shed his father had warned him about. In fact, he wouldn't even talk about it with anybody. It was never discussed. Somewhere in the deep, dark basement of his mind, it lurked. And one evening, after a particularly exhausting day, he was sitting having a pint of beer in a pub with a good friend. And his friend said, "You know, Jack," he said, "what you've done with the farm is incredible. It's amazing. You've employed lots of people. It runs ecologically. It's clean. It's so productive." He said, "It's amazing. But one thing puzzles me. Your farm is so well organized, none of it is wasted. Except I've noticed that old shed behind the barn on the left of that little lane. And it's weird. It just sits there, not doing anything." But the young man couldn't really give a reason why that was the case. Okay. And the next morning, so early, the moon still sat listless on the couch of clouds, and the stars waited patiently to hand over to the blue sky. The young farmer arose from his bed, and he felt a new determination. He wasn't the kind of man who liked to leave problems unsolved. So he got dressed, and he found himself walking down the steps where he lived out into the coolness of the morning and towards that barn at the end of the lane, and then towards the shed. And it was very strange for him to be in such an unfamiliar part of such an otherwise familiar place. And now the little boy inside of the man called out inside his mind as if to scream a warning, "Don't go in there, danger, danger, danger." But the man remembered he was a man now, and he was the man in charge of his place. And so he went in anyway. And what he saw was this. He saw rusty yet sharp nails sticking out from the walls and rotting floorboards that must have been there for generations, and a ceiling with beams that looked like they might fall in at any moment, and shattered broken glass and bottles of noxious fuel and rusting tools. And in that instant, he chuckled to himself. After all those years, because indeed this was a very, very dangerous place for a 9-year-old boy. So this story clearly shows how beliefs act as a shortcut. They serve a purpose for a time, but because they stop you thinking, they can resist being updated and so become entrenched. And I can't tell you how many clients I've used this story with because it fits so many problem patterns. So stories used by therapists that match the pattern of a client's limiting belief or the way the belief works, but produces an analogical resolution, can be profoundly healing. And that tends to be how stories act as effective reframes or belief challenges. But belief is so fascinating and so ultimately human and so much a part of our clients' problems that we can really understand people much better if we understand how beliefs work. So I'm going to be talking about a particular type of belief, a type of belief that can crush the self-esteem and life of those who become trapped by it. But I want to highlight something essential to know about how beliefs work on people. Now, first off, I just want to say I'm not up for trying to convince everyone that they need to change their beliefs to match my beliefs. You know, if you have different ideas on spirituality or religion or politics to me, that's fine. But some beliefs are so damaging to the person holding them that to be able to help them, at least to see the limitations of their belief by exposing them to a wider context, can be emergency life-saving help. We might call those toxic beliefs. Now, before I get really focused on how the mind works, I used to assume that beliefs were about what people thought. You know, that at some time they had been persuaded through logic to believe something, and that if you wanted them to believe something else, all you had to do was to appeal to their logic to convince them that they were seeing things wrong, and all of a sudden they would see the light and understand things better. And I'm sure all of us know by now that doesn't really tend to work too well. Of course, some beliefs are based on good common sense. You know, so I believe the bruise on my toe today was caused by me stubbing it yesterday, and that's a belief based on logic. But if I was a hypochondriac, the emotion of my anxiety might have me bypassing logic altogether, discounting the fact that I stubbed my toe yesterday and starting to believe that the lump on my toe is some kind of catastrophic tumor. So using logic to change some beliefs may work if those beliefs are not particularly connected to a person's emotions and unconscious motivations. But when beliefs are locked in place by strong unconscious emotion and impulses, trying to loosen them with logic is like trying to shift a boulder with a toothpick. And sometimes people even sort of know that their beliefs aren't rational, that they have, you know, two parts of themselves as far as their approach to truth is concerned. For example, I recall the writer Idris Shah describing in one of his books how he was in a certain country with his wife who happened to be pregnant, and they were in a store bargaining over the price of a dress that his wife wanted. And when the store owner refused to budge from his unreasonable price, Shah and his wife left the store and started walking away. But they'd only gone a short distance when the shopkeeper ran after them, wanting to give Shah's wife the dress for free. And they asked him why, and he said something like, "In this country, it's considered terrible luck if you refuse to give a pregnant woman something she wants." And Shah said to the man, "Look, both you and I know that that is superstitious nonsense." To which the storekeeper said, "Yes, I know it's nonsense, but you see, the trouble is, I believe it." And that so neatly sums up the nature of many beliefs, how they're often predicated on imagination, fear, hope, and other emotions. rather than any sort of logic. What's more, we can often rationalize that we hold certain beliefs for logical reasons when the real fuel for the belief is not rational emotion based on fear or hope. So logic is way down the list when it comes to adopting and maintaining a belief, and just trying to out-logic low self-esteem or depressive thinking or some other self-destructive belief system doesn't really work. Well, that may only have the undesired effect of making your client cling to that belief more tightly, which is what we do when we feel something we own is under threat or being taken away from us. When someone tells you that they're a bad person, what they're telling you is not what they think, but what they feel. They may even say, yes, I know logically I'm not the worst person in the world, but that doesn't help because I feel that I am. Self-destructive belief systems, such as low self-esteem, belief driven by the feeling of depression and chronic anger, make people extremist in their beliefs. People have known for centuries that to radicalize or brainwash someone with beliefs, you need to make them emotional first. And this narrows their focus of attention, and they lose the capacity for the perception of a wider context, at least during the time that they're being conditioned by their new belief. So a child being bullied and abused becomes highly open to conditioning and may, during that time, absorb beliefs about himself, which are funneled through the incredibly strong focus of high emotionality caused by the abuse. So years later as an adult, they may still hold that conditioned belief that they are a bad person or unlovable or any other negative messages that were fed to them during that fearful emotional conditioning. And similarly, when someone comes out of a cult or away from extremism or lifts out of depression or low self-esteem, it's not that they necessarily start adopting extremist positive views, it's more that they start to become more moderate in their beliefs. They see a wider context. So helping people become calmer helps them see reality in wider ranges, and therefore what seemed like a complete truth comes to be seen in context as a very partial way of viewing reality. It then becomes easier for them to adopt wider, less constricted and constricting perspectives. When we help someone see wider and new perspectives, we reframe their perception, or to be more accurate, we help them reframe their perspective so that either new, healthier beliefs can form, or they can stand aside from their rigid belief around the issue that was causing them problems. So this is why a reframe needs to appeal not just to logic, but also to the heart of a person. It has to match where they are emotionally, but also make undeniable sense for them on every level. So here's the example I mentioned earlier, where I believe that a reframe helped save a woman's life, and she certainly believed it did. So years ago, a woman came to see me, and she was very depressed and anxious at first, and she described how pointless and useless her and her life were. And she talked about all the terrible things that had happened to her from childhood on. She told me she was damaged goods. And I asked her what she would want from life, and she said that she would have liked to meet someone and have a family, but it was too late. She was damaged goods from her past, and it was all hopeless and pointless. And later in that first session, when we were talking about something else, I suddenly looked at her intensely and said something which surprised her. I said, "You are here for a purpose. Do you know what that purpose is?" And she looked startled, but very focused by these words. So I continued with, You're here for the very important purpose of demonstrating to many unfortunate people that it is possible to rise up from a terrible childhood and live a satisfying, happy, and productive life. And if you hadn't had all that past hurt, you wouldn't be able to serve that purpose, to show people that it can be done despite all the bad stuff that had gone on in the past. Now, all I had done, really, was deliver the idea that there was a really important point to what she had seen as pointless. Now, I saw her a few times and helped her stop traumatic memories terrorizing her and so on, and she seemed to make fast progress. And a few years later, I happened to see this woman in a big superstore, and she had a child with her now, and she told me she was married and working, and she looked happy. And it was then that she told me that just before she'd come to see me for that therapy many years before, she'd already decided she was going to kill herself. And that weekend, because there was no point to her living and no hope for the future. Now, she hadn't told me of her suicidal plans, but she said when I had given meaning to her suffering, she told me that those words had reframed everything for her. She could suddenly see a point to all that had happened to her, that she was now happy to show her own child that no matter what happened to you, you can overcome it. And she told me that that was the greatest gift she could give to her child, because, as she said before we parted company, that nothing is really pointless because you can make something out of nothing, or even a terrible childhood. She said that she felt those few words had actually saved her life. Now, during the therapy, I could have argued with the client, but when you look back at the first story where the guy knows his superstition isn't true or makes sense, but still believes it, you understand he doesn't know how to unbelieve it. He doesn't know how to do that. He doesn't know how to change his emotional relationship to the idea. So belief is not about logic, it's about feeling. So when your client states a negative belief about themselves, they're saying something like, "This is how I feel. Can you help me feel differently?" And it's difficult to change the feeling by purely cognitive means, unless it's paired with some sort of visceral component, like a shock, humor, or story. So beliefs are powerful. They can heal us or they can destroy us. Beliefs can ruin our relationships or help us be happy with the people in our lives. They can determine, in part, whether we feel and become successful or whether we give up at the first hurdle and feel hopeless. And because changing beliefs, reframing, is such a core therapeutic skill, we created a course in reframing skills, which you can take online. Just click the button below to find out more about the course, which we called Conversational Reframing. So I hope the presentation on belief has given you some new ideas about how to help people, and I hope to see you on the course. And please leave a comment below the video to tell me what you thought of this, or to discuss any ideas you might have about beliefs, because I do read every comment, and feel free to let me know your thoughts.